You've probably heard the phrase survival of the fittest, but what does that really mean? That muscle men live the longest? Not exactly. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to describe what fitness is and how it's related to natural selection, and what evolution is in genetic terms. If you look around, you'll notice that no two individuals are exactly the same. That's pretty obvious in humans. Even the identical twins you know, I'm sure you can tell apart. In some other species, it might be obvious too, like dogs. I'm sure you could pick your own dog out of a crowd. But can you tell the difference between two ants that have invaded your picnic, or two tigers at the zoo? Not all genetic variety impacts the way an organism looks. It can have no apparent effect on their phenotype because lots of our DNA either codes for nothing, or we just don't know yet what it does. Or it can impact the way things in our bodies work. The only exception to this rule that no two individuals are identical is if those individuals are clones, like bacteria that reproduce asexually by mitosis, or identical twins. Looking at a population, remember from ecology that a population is a group of organisms of the same species that live in the same area and reproduce together. So looking at a population, all of the alleles in that population are called a gene pool. Here's an example of a mouse gene pool for fur color. Each brown mouse has two brown alleles, and each heterozygous mouse has one brown allele. Homozygous mice each have two black alleles, and a heterozygous mouse has one black allele each. So if we add up all the black alleles and all the brown alleles, we can express the percentage of black alleles in the population. And this is called the allele frequency. We'll look at this idea a little bit later. So we've established that all living things are different from each other except if they reproduce asexually or are identical twins. So that means within a population there's genetic variety. Organisms of the same species must also compete for resources. In order to survive, they need food, space to live, and mates. In most cases, there's not enough of these to go around, so only some individuals get their needs met. The ones that don't get their needs met may die or have no or few offspring. The ones that do get their needs met might have some advantage, allowing them to get the resources. Like imagine a crazed mom at Toys R Us on Black Friday. The latest video game is in short supply, but the moms who can endure the least amount of sleep to get in line early, or the pushiest moms, are going to get the video games. It has some characteristic, and perhaps it's genetic in nature, that's allowing them to win the battle for the hottest video game. In this example, there's no threat of death or less offspring if someone doesn't get the video game, or at least let's hope not. But in nature, life can be cruel. Perhaps in this diagram of gray ducks, dark color allows the ducks to blend into the mud surrounding the lake they live in. The light-colored ducks are easily seen by predators, and so they don't survive to produce offspring. The alleles for white feathers die with them and are not passed on to future generations. The alleles for dark feathers survive, and several generations down the road, the same population has many more dark-feathered ducks than their ancestors did. So there are three requirements for natural selection, or survival of the fittest, to take place. A population must have genetic variety, resources must be limited, and finally, some variations provide an advantage, allowing the organism to survive or have more offspring. These are the three key ingredients for natural selection. So here's the concept of fitness again. It doesn't matter if the organism is big and muscular. Fitness means any characteristic that helps an organism survive and mate. Do you remember when we watched the Life movie and the small male cuttlefish snuck in right under the nose of the large one and mated with the female he was protecting? That small cuttlefish was not muscular, but he was sneaky, and he got the lady, so he was fit. Some cuttlefish are large and others are small, so we've got genetic variation. Mates are in short supply, so there's the limited resources piece, and being small or being large are both advantages that allow the cuttlefish to mate. So there's the last piece, about some variations being more fit than others. We can say medium-sized cuttlefish are selected against because they're not big enough to fight off other potential mates, and they're not small enough to be sneaky. Small and large cuttlefish are selected for because the large ones can intimidate the other males and mate with the females, while the small males are able to sneak in and mate with the females. A little more famous example of natural selection involves moths that live on ash trees in Europe. Ash trees have light-colored bark, and so the moths that live on the bark of the ash trees have an advantage if they're light colored. They're able to avoid predators. Genetic variety, limited resources. There's not enough dark and light places to live, and a phenotype that provides an advantage when it comes to surviving and reproducing. So this example can also be classified as natural selection. The moth's environment, the moth's color, and the cuttlefish's size are adaptations to surviving in their particular environment. During the Industrial Revolution, when pollution covered ash trees, making them dark, it was no longer an adaptation to be a light-colored moth. These ones could be easily seen against the bark. Now the adaptation that gives the moth higher fitness was having dark color. So fitness always depends on the environment that the organism is in. Here's a couple of examples of common types of adaptations. When a harmless snake has color patterns like a poisonous snake, predators will avoid them both. These are both adaptations, the poison and the coloring on the harmless snake. Camouflage is another adaptation that allows organisms to avoid predators. Not all adaptations have to do with being visible. This vulture is displaying an intimidating behavior that's scaring off predators. This behavior gives the vulture an advantage over vultures who don't display this behavior. It involves genetics because intimidation is not something learned from parents, and it requires large wings. Just to summarize, for natural selection to take place, 3 conditions must be fulfilled. There must be variation in genes within a population. Secondly, resources must be limited. And finally, organisms must reproduce at different rates. After a while, the genes that code for the adaptations that provide better fitness become more common than the traits that do not provide these advantages. It becomes more common because the alleles for traits that don't provide an advantage or are bad for the organism's fitness are removed from the gene pool when the organisms with those traits die and don't pass on their genes to their offspring. Think about the gray duck example again. The darker the duck, the higher the fitness. When the white duck dies, it takes its white alleles along with it. In the next generation, there are less or no white alleles. So we can say that from one generation to the next, the allele frequency changes. This is the basic definition of evolution. The allele frequency in a population changes from one generation to the next. Pause the video and check your understanding about how natural selection happens. Describe what's happening in each picture. On the next slide, the captions to these pictures are revealed. And when you're finished, don't forget to take the online quiz.